grad schools I applied to, they were the only one that gave me an assistantship. So I was like, well, I guess I gotta stay here if I'm already here and they're gonna pay for school. So I'm still here. And I just graduated from there after 7 long years.
Congratulations. Did you know the whole time that you wanted to do the grad school thing, or was that kind of a relatively recent occurrence?
I had aspirations for continued higher education, even when I was like an undergrad. Like I worked at a writing center, and I was really inspired by my supervisor who had like a PhD in like rhetoric or something. I was like, I want to be like her. And I guess getting a PhD is how I do that. And here I am today with a PhD, just not at all doing anything that I planned to do with it.
We should establish a timeline. When did you end up starting school again?
I started school at the University of Georgia in 2017.
I mean, it sounds like everything that kind of happened at once, right? Within the space of like 1 or 2 years. I mean, you're doing like 5 or 6 different things now. And it sounds like 2017, 2018 was a pretty hectic time.
Yeah, I don't know. I got into grad school, decided I was running for office, started rapping. Yeah, all around the same time. I actually hadn't really thought about that before. Like, wow, you just decided to be so extra starting in 2017 or so.
Were they like intertwined, or was it just a weird happenstance that it all happened relatively the same time?
I guess I had somewhat of an identity crisis because I like moved to the city to like, because there's this cute boy I liked, and then that didn't work out. And so I was like, what is my life now? What am I doing?
When we were describing why you moved out there first, you left out that important detail, which is that relationship that you moved out there did not happen.
Nah, it happened, but
well, it didn't keep happening.
It shouldn't have.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah. But so I was looking for reinvention, and so I started rapping. Well, I guess I got into grad school first, and then I started rapping, and then I got, had been involved in some community organizing, and then decided to like take that to the next level and run for office. So yeah, all that was like in the span of a year-ish.
I've never moved for somebody. I guess I should probably consider myself lucky. I have had somebody move for me, which done a couple of years, but long run didn't really pan out. But the difficulty and the heartbreak of like breaking up with somebody is enough, even if you didn't move to a different city for them. But that must have been tough to like find yourself like in a completely different town. And the reason why you moved there initially didn't work out.
Totally. And I feel like, especially when you're younger, as early 20s at the time, it's very easy to define one's self-worth based on one's relationships. Like the pinnacle of like, you finally made it in life to like in personal matters is like, you got a good, rock solid relationship. It's like you when you're young, you're trying to like seek validation everywhere. And so that added layer of like that sense of like self-worth, like, oh, I made it, we're dating and we got the cute pictures on Instagram together or whatever dumb things motivate young people sometimes. Like that definitely then spurred me to like, okay, I got to find a higher meaning than just this, because this is not a sustainable source of serotonin.
Up to that point, what were you doing, or I guess, what were your ambitions?
I was a substitute at a childcare center. It's crazy. They like paid me $9.50 an hour to watch like 10 2-year-olds. So messed up. I was a wedding caterer. I worked at a print shop. I taught English as a second language. And so I just like had a grab bag of random jobs, often all at once, some 2 or 3 at a time. And was just like enjoying the music scene and vibrant culture of what service industry people do when they get off work in a small town. I did have aspirations to continue my studies, not necessarily to be a certain something, but I've just always been very hungry for knowledge and intellectually curious. And so like I wanted to go back to school because like I didn't necessarily like school, but I loved learning. So I knew that was in the cards for me at some point, or so I hoped at least. I
haven't spent a lot of time in Athens. I spent like 4 or 5 days there once, and it seems like a pretty good place to find yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to discover one's artistry because of the varied and many like musicians and art musical styles represented in its scene. It's like, a pretty compact city. So it also has a strong sense of community where you hang out around enough, you're going to like just bump into a lot of regulars at a bar that then become your friends and maybe become your friends for life. And so there's a lot of benefits to it for a young person trying to figure out where they are in the world and who they are, definitely. But as I have increasingly filtered almost everything in my life through the lens of public policy, now that I am a policymaker, I definitely see the glaring issues with Athens, Georgia in a way that I actually can't unsee. So,
which are?
Wow, where do I begin? So I think the housing crisis is probably the most acute representation of just like what sorts of dynamics control the city. So we are the seat of the University of Georgia. So we have like a quarter of our population is students, most of whom are very wealthy. We have one of the wealthiest student bodies of any public higher education institution in the country. And so the way that then shapes how everything is marketed and the entire economy, but particularly in housing, like you don't have a community if there aren't people that live together. And so if you don't have housing for the people, like you don't have a community. But increasingly, you're seeing gentrification, you're seeing all of the new housing developments catered towards very wealthy undergraduate population and things of this sort. So like I've watched the same people that like I came up with in my early years in Athens, like not even able to live in the city anymore practically. And so it's also like that trajectory over time and not necessarily it's in like inherent flaws. I savor the days when I did not think about everything through these lenses because it was a lot easier to enjoy just having a dark and stormy at 11:45 after work, back before all of these things felt like they were my responsibility to fix.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, as they say.
Yeah.
What was that switch that flipped in you where you felt that you really needed to actively at least try your best to help make a difference?
I jumped in, both in hip hop and policymaking. I just jumped in because I felt like nobody else was doing anything and like not necessarily to like succeed at it. I was like, I might as well take a stab because it seems like we need this and nobody's doing it. So I started organizing hip hop shows, not necessarily with the like intention to try to make Athens better, but like realizing through time how it was somewhat of a political project, given that Athens has remained de facto segregated, particularly in many ways, but in its art scene as well. And so trying to bridge that gap is like a form of cultural organizing. But I think this was most present in deciding to run for office, realizing that like the guy who had represented the district for 25 years and had stepped down had never had an opponent in an election, more or less. And the person running to be his successor was also running unopposed. And so it's just like, yo, look, I have a very interesting and perhaps in some aspects lacking resume, but like someone has to run. Like this isn't democracy if like nobody runs. So I just jumped in there and did it. I was like, I do want to make my community better. I don't know if they will choose me or if they should, but it's not democracy if you don't have options. So I'm going to be the person to try this. And now I'm here 4 years later.
You say these things like they're inevitable, but I think a lot of people feeling like they couldn't do it and wouldn't take that plunge. I don't know if confidence is the right word. Is that something inherent that you've had in you your entire life, that sort of decision to really jump with both feet?
I think it definitely comes from my background in hip hop. So like I was once upon a time a very feared battle rapper in the city of Athens. But I didn't start out that way. I started out that way getting like people making fun of like my mama or like calling me a lesbian or whatever. And then like having to laugh it off and dap this person up and admit that I lost the rap battle.
Nobody starts as a feared battle rapper.
Over and over again, just humiliation, but for fun almost, like over and over again. And so I guess that gave me the courage in a certain sense where like I'm less afraid of failing. Like, courage is seen as like, oh, you are daring enough to fight until you win. But like courage is also like willingness to fail. Some people are so scared of failing, but it's not usually most circumstances, it's not going to kill you. So I just jumped in there like, it's not going to kill me if I get laughed out of this town. I've been laughed off of plenty of stages, etc. So let's go.
Once somebody's making fun of your mother in front of a large group of people, how bad could it possibly get, right?
Right.
Probably a lot of people in my general socioeconomic place in the world am largely familiar with Athens artistically through the Elephant Six scene.
Yeah.
And then obviously like going back to REM and Pylon and things like that. But I mean, it sounds like, and you alluded to this a little bit, by the time you arrived, was there any kind of existing hip hop scene in the town?
There was like a very robust hip hop scene in Athens, to be clear. But the issue is that like downtown was seen as like the epicenter of everything musical, but it also carried with it a stigma of like, if you've got like baggy pants on or Timberlands or certain kinds of dress, you would, quote unquote, you wouldn't be allowed into a lot of establishments. So people, like Black people, just like would not even really come downtown. And so the project of mine was then just integrating these worlds of like, we got people on the east side and the west side who are, you know, playing at these like far-flung clubs that aren't getting the shine they deserve because they're not occupying these like seats of creative power in like the popular imagination. And so let's bring them into, let's like put them in the buildings where the broader music community like recognizes talent and give them the chance to like be seen by more and more people. I mean, like going back to like, I mean, everyone has heard of like Bubba Sparks, but then there's also folks like Issues who toured with KRS-One. We've had a number of like very popular artists today who had brief like childhood experiences in Athens, like Yin Yang Twins went to Cedar Falls High School briefly. And so we had like a really robust scene in various ways over the decades. It's just a matter of like whether or not it was recognized by the kingmakers of Athens music.
I'm from California. I went to school out in Santa Cruz, and it was just sort of like implicitly understood that if you reach a certain level that you would, you know, go to San Francisco or somewhere else. And obviously, like Atlanta has a very storied history in hip hop. Is that effectively generally what happens? Is you hit a certain level and you just go over to Atlanta?
More or less, yeah. I mean, or you get picked up by a label that's in Atlanta, so now you're recording in Atlanta, and then like it's necessarily seen that you need Atlanta ties to like make it big. So I guess there is a certain amount of brain drain in that regard, or people like, well, once you get big enough, like you don't need Athens anymore because what can you get here? Like, you know, what resources or connections are there here to really launch you to the next level?
What was scarier, you know, starting to rap at that point in your life or running against a somewhat established political opponent?
What was scarier? It's funny because I actually think rapping is scarier because I still experience the terror every time I get on stage now. Like, I'm not scared of politics anymore. There's very few times where I'm like, oh no, this is bad. But it's nothing like this, the horror, like the paralysis I still feel right before I get on stage today. And so it's not necessarily like the quality or quantity of fear. It's just like the fear that I feel when I am rapping is like immediate in my mind because it's still constant and regular. Like I'm going to have a heart attack. And so it's not that it's actually worse than politics. It's just like, I don't feel afraid of politics anymore, but like rapping for some reason still gives me the willies. I don't know. I
would say at least first blush, the stakes are higher in politics.
Perhaps it's that because the stakes are higher, like I do have to work. I have had to work harder to stay calm. And so like that has brought down my general baseline of anxiety in that context because I can't afford to like freeze in the moment when I'm doing politics. So like I work hard to stay calm versus the uncontrollable and, you know, why even try to control it? Anxiety of like when you're about to get on stage.
From the standpoint of worst case scenario, something goes wrong when you're performing a song, you stop and start over or something.
Yeah.
Far larger consequences if something goes terribly wrong in the political world.
Oh, my Lord. Yes, indeed.
There's a performative aspect of politics, and I assume that at very least when you're campaigning that you were standing on stages in front of people.
Yeah, standing on stoops, giving, you know, my stump speech, walking up to random porches and knocking on people's door and giving them my little rap. Not my rap, but, you know, like, my elevator pitch. And then, you know, getting up there for debates, hosting fundraisers and giving speeches in front of people. I feel like I could handle all of that really well because of my background in performance. And to this day, I still really feel like being in City Hall is just another rap battle. You got to just like think quick on your feet, try to just rep where you're from and what you're about, and then keep it cool with the people that you are fighting with later because no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. And so, you know, you leave afterwards and crack a joke about how nice someone's cardigan is, even though they just spit in the face of all the things you believe and love. So yeah, it's a very similar skill set, I think, mentally as well as emotionally.
I have tried to think of like a good analogy. If it's like, you know, you see like people on opposite sports teams or something, like, you know, screwing around with each other afterwards, or like wrestlers or something, where it's just like, yeah, obviously, again, stakes are really high, but like you have to deal with these people day to day.
You do. That's maybe the hardest part, is the human element of like consensus and the interpersonal dynamics of the governing body. It's unfun.
I didn't know until I was reading up on this and reading up on you. I had no idea, and still don't really know what a county commissioner does.
Look, I didn't know what a county commissioner did either. Like, I just like had been watching the other candidates in that year's like election cycle and hearing about like, oh, we were fighting for affordable housing, criminal justice reform, fair free public transportation. And I was like, I like all those things. That's cool. That's what a commissioner can do. I want to do that. Let's go. I'd never been inside City Hall to like give public comment or anything. And so it was definitely a very steep learning curve. But I think that actually like that appetite to learn is a very key personality trait or skill to cultivate as a public servant. Like, you ain't got to know everything. You just have to be committed to learning and committed to figuring things out. You don't have to have all the answers, but just like, you have to have an open heart to receiving new information and trying your best to process it. So that's what I did. That's what I'm still doing. It's one of the things I love most about the job is I get to learn about a fascinating array of topics, from the conditions at our jail and what they do when someone's having a nervous breakdown, to our stormwater infrastructure and how they get trash out of the river. Just everything. It's so fascinating. That
would be my fear of running for political office, is that like as you get in and then like day to day, it's super boring.
I didn't say it was, in all of it was interesting. I find studying the topics fascinating. I find dealing with the tedium of sitting through the meetings in which we are arguing about minutia not my favorite part of the job. And so, yeah, there's aspects I like. There's aspects I could do without.
But it sounds like overall it's been a positive experience.
I've certainly learned a lot. I don't even know if I would generally, I'm really hard on myself. So I don't even know if I would generally call it a positive experience, because I definitely would have loved to have done more by this point in my tenure as a commissioner. But I've learned, but because I love to learn, I will forever be grateful for how much I have learned in these first 4 years, and remain motivated by that. I'm excited to learn more things. So it is positive in that regard. But like, man, I wanted to have ended homelessness by now. I know maybe it was naive, but like, I want to transform society, and that's not really what we do. So it just remains just a couple of years, decades ahead of me. I can see the vision of where this all might be going, but I need to remain patient.
Given obviously like all of the bureaucratic red tape, but also probably some of the opposition that you end up dealing with, because everything that you mentioned, these are the sorts of things that shouldn't be radical ideas, but are viewed as being radical ideas. Whether ultimately you can affect more change in office versus like organizing. Yes.
So something that I have come upon through this time, that's why I'm so grateful for being a commissioner, because it allowed me to come to this like more coherent theory of power and theory of change.
I wish I could describe this hand gesture that you're doing as you say that. It's sort of like pulling like an apple off a tree or
something. Yeah, I don't know. I have to like post the screenshot when the episode goes live. Yeah. I mean, the power of the people is mightier than a politician. And I truly, deeply believe that, in that from studying history, but as well as looking at what has happened in my time as a commissioner, like it's undeniable that the best things the government has ever done have come about under immense pressure for organized demands by mass movements of people. And even in Athens, like some of our proudest accomplishments include fair free public transit, which took like 10 years of people like routinely showing up at City Hall to like advocate for, to make happen. Passing the first act of reparations in the state of Georgia. tons of people having rallies, town halls, packing the room at City Hall to make that happen. Our Public Safety Civilian Oversight Board, our non-discrimination ordinance, living wages for all of our employees. We didn't just invent that and do it. It happened because people in the streets, like in the community, fought for it. And so I often feel adrift in that I have largely, this is not a flex, I've largely accomplished everything I first ran for. And so now I'm like, well, now what do I do?
It's just a second ago you were talking about how little you accomplished.
But like now I want to do more bigger things. And it doesn't feel like that much in hindsight. I don't know. Like when you say, oh, I'm going to make affordable housing, that's such a general thing that, yeah, I can say I did that. But like, did I achieve housing for all Athenians? Nah. And that's what I would like to do.
You can still feel good about having done like any modicum of that, right?
Yeah, I should. What was it? Oh, so yeah, we need like mass movements. Like, think about this example. So I ran on raising the minimum wage, which I can't do in the state of Georgia because it is against the Georgia state constitution. It must be done at the state legislature level. But if there was like a mini general strike in Athens where all of the workers decided to walk off until their bosses raised their wages to $20 an hour, they could accomplish that faster than the local government could. Like we can't. But like literally if people organized and made that happen, maybe not the whole city, but like in a single workplace, if they organized and fought for that, they could win that for themselves. And I, as their politician, cannot. So like that's an example where it's like if we put pressure in the right places with the right amount of people, that is how anything happens. Yeah. And now I don't know what to do with that because I'm a politician governing, but I also have this strong community organizing itch where it's like, I want to get out there and rile people up to like fight for stuff because we need that. But we've seen bad examples of politicians doing that, like our last president, where riling up one's base can lead to not good things. So it's just trying to like parse through, like, what is my role in all this, knowing what I know now about liberation movement history.
When you run for office and get elected, does that preclude you from certain aspects of organizing?
I don't think so. I do think it is a capacity question, given that like our agendas that we vote on every first Tuesday of the month are like 500 pages long, and we get them like the Friday before that meeting. So things like that where it's just like, I want to be out there knocking doors all the time, but it is not necessarily a sustainable way to go about it. I do regularly like commune with activists and like help them shape campaigns, etc. But it's also weird to be like, I guess people's understanding of what politicians should do is interesting to me as well, because I think that the idea we are given is that you elect someone and then they just go do what you want. So folks' response of like, why are you out here community organizing? Just go do the thing that people want. Suddenly,
like you have a superpower because you're in office.
I have a superpower of just like, I should just be able to go and unilaterally do what they think I should, like they want me to do. I was like, I am one vote of 10. And we also deal with a lot of bureaucracy. And it just takes sustained pressure from more than just me.
Sure. And it turns out that people don't like it when politicians do things unilaterally.
Right. Yeah. And so I just struggle with that a lot, where when I come to people and say, yes, let's get organized and let's all go to City Hall and I'll fight for you and we'll fight together, people are like, nah, you go do it. And I don't think that works. I don't believe in that at these days. So that is my struggle oftentimes.
I think the main struggle when it comes to that action is how frustrating it can be, and how often it just feels like you're out there all the time and that the needle isn't being moved. I don't know anybody at this point over the last years who isn't undergoing like some sort of existential crisis.
That's helpful to remember. I think I have been having one lately, but it's helpful to know that it is not just me. Most people, I find, have actually gone through some sort of personal transformation, for better or worse, these last 2 years. So I'm not alone in that.
What is your personal existential crisis?
So as I come to see the incompatibilities of being a politician and being a community organizer, while not total, but like they are not, it's not a, the Venn diagram is not a circle. I feel a pull. I feel my capacity is strained, and I really wish sometimes I could just dedicate myself to one or the other. But I just love doing so many things. I just can't. I don't know. I don't know what to do.
You're talking about, I can't really do the organizing thing because I'm so busy with the county commissioner job. But it's like, yeah, we're kind of only scratching the surface on the things that you do.
I guess so.
The initial impetus for this conversation is the music. You've got certain people I look at the aggregate of what they do, and I can't wrap my brain around how they find time to do any of those things.
Yeah, I feel like I'm blessed with a nightmare of options, of choices. It's a beautiful thing and a terrifying and terrible thing. I'm very blessed that I get to do a lot of cool stuff, but it is an existential crisis of which one is going to help the world more, and maybe I should do that. But which one makes me happiest? And maybe I should just go do that. Or I enjoy the a little bit of the chaos, a little bit of the variety and the challenge. And so, yeah, I just think that I also feel external pressure to figure out my lane, because not many people do this many different random things. So that is perhaps my existential crisis.
An embarrassment of riches, it sounds like.
Embarrassment of riches. I knew there was an actual term for it, but I was like,
that's like a very unconsciously pessimistic version of that you made up.
No, that sounds worse. Yeah.
A nightmare of opportunities. That's like a murder of crows.
Yeah.
How did Bellringer end up gelling?
So I started writing it shortly after my first album came out, and just in bits and pieces, a lot of it just in my head in the car, driving to play different shows. And then it really started popping off 2020 for some reason or another. I just had a lot of time to myself to not be constantly on the road playing shows, to just be quiet with my thoughts. But also there was so many things to process, obviously. And so in the quiet, being able to really sit with a lot of my feelings that I hadn't been dealing with, and actually churning those through the gears of songwriting to make the sausage. But then also watching workers get thrown under the bus in the name of, the stock market, and people kneeling in the streets surrounded by tear gas. What do I make of all of this? Starting to get, my own role in the uprising of 2020, emerging as somewhat of a de facto leader on accident. I started getting death threats and things like that. And so trying to process the toll that it had on my mental health, grasping with the reality of my position and that this means this is a thing. The volume of information and change that that we all experienced during that time. I was just writing. And then sort of, I think, oh yeah, I was going to have a baby. I was like, oh yeah, I'm having a baby. And so I was like, I got to get this done before I have a baby, because I hear that's difficult to do. An infant.
I haven't heard that. That's interesting.
Challenging? Yeah, I don't know. So they say. So yeah, I had a hard deadline, finish this album. And I think I literally, we shipped it off to get mixed a month, 3 weeks before I was due. So yeah, and now it's here.
You used the phrase de facto leader on accident, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, obviously, there are certain things that were done intentionally in terms of the organizing that you did and running for office, but you feel like your sort of role in the community was to a certain extent accidental?
Yeah. Once again, it was looking around and it felt like no one was going to step up and do something. And so I was like, oh man, okay, I guess I will organize these protests and stuff. And also I think people needed, and particularly not just among activists, politicians, standing with the very radical demands being made in the streets. No one else is going to hear these folks. I guess I have to be the person standing with you all on the elected side of things, because no one else was about that life. And so I didn't want it to be me, but it had to be again. And so I looking back, I wish it hadn't been me, but here we are. It happened. And good things came out of it. It's just it changed things forever. So
death threats are the obvious answer, but why do you wish it hadn't been you?
The fracturing among the activist community, given the trauma and stress we were all under during that time. I lost friendships. Yeah. And things like that. I hate that. Death threats, obviously, but the emotional toll on myself of just like going out to every single one of these protests and knowing that if anything happened to anyone, I would feel guilt for the rest of my life. And like, I think some of that weight still stays with me, though that threat has passed. I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. And I just think it's better when the people really lead politicians. So like folks, you know, I'm a proponent of defunding the police. And so folks didn't like know what that really meant in action because they didn't really understand. Like, I know what
they still don't.
Yeah, they don't. But like, yeah, but in terms of like functionally, like the gears of government, like what does that mean? And so stepping in to be like, okay, guys, I have this idea of how it could work. Are you down? As opposed to like actually having people bring me what they wanted to see and rolling with that. You know, it's sort of like backwards. Like things like that make me uncomfortable, where I step into like movement, work, liberation spaces with ideas, but like I'm the politician. I'm supposed to be listening to people. And so I just struggle with that a lot to this day, and definitely like wish that had been I wish that would have played out differently during the uprising, perhaps. I do always dream of an ideal world. So
having a kid was, you know, like a literal deadline as you described it. But beyond that, is there, you know, especially with this, the confluence of things, you know, that are happening, not just COVID, obviously like George Floyd and everything else. Is there a way in which like, you know, bringing a life into this world is also a motivating factor? It
is, certainly. I do want to make the world better for like a concrete human in my life, and not like an abstraction of like a community, a neighborhood, my constituents, which like, yes, they are physical, living, real people, but it is also an abstraction in a certain sense. And so like, there's this little tiny human that is drawing on the mirror with a banana right now who like, I need to protect and I need to make the world better for, particularly in the face of threats like climate change, et cetera. So that does add a degree of pressure generally, but then it has also brought a greater sensitivity to issues of healthcare and just family supports, reckoning with how difficult it is to do anything if you don't have consistent childcare, having thousands of dollars in unpaid medical bills, still, all of these kinds of things. And just thinking about folks in my community who aren't able to give their kids the kinds of lives they want and the myriad ways that like manifests. Yeah. So there's like a policy shift in focus as well with that. But yeah, the stakes are higher because like this person who did not choose to be here, I chose for him to be here, is now going to have to like live the consequences of my public policy. And so it feels a little more tense.
I like the banana thing because I saw you tweet about that too. And I think it's funny. I think a part of getting older and you know, like being more mature is the recognition that obviously you can't do everything. I interview a lot of musicians. I was talking to a jazz musician earlier this week, and, you know, I was saying, at a certain point, you have to accept the fact that no song is going to sound like it sounds in your head.
Oh, do I have to accept it though?
Sometimes you got to let the kid draw on the mirror with the banana.
Yeah, you do. And those little moments of joy in themselves, because I feel like a lot of people my age are like, nah, we ain't having kids. I can't afford a rent, let alone a mortgage. I got student loans, climate catastrophe. Why would you have a kid? But it's just like, it's fun and sweet. Like, I love this person. Like, don't you love to love people? It's great. So, yeah, let them draw on the banana. Let them draw on the banana. That's also what things would probably do. Because, yeah, like, things just unfold the way they do, and there's beauty in it. But we need to accept. It's beautiful to accept.
I'm just thinking of like what was it the serenity prayer they call it in AA, where it's like, give me the
courage to. Yeah, you got it. I'll let you go.
Except the things that I cannot change. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Is knowing that there is there's an extent to which you can move the needle. Mm-hmm. And it's the campsite thing, right? Like to leave the campsite better than you found it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that saves my sanity often is having seen examples of how a small act can ripple out into something somewhat momentous. So like when I first ran for office, I had a friend who just got fired from her movie theater job. And I was like, hey, you want to be my campaign manager? And she was. And she went from doing that to being, I would argue, one of the best labor organizers in the state of Georgia, because she had like a foothold to like get some campaign experience and then go just do movement work full time. And you never know when something like that might happen, where like the person you help support in becoming an organizer becomes like the face of the movement, or that single email you send turns into a project that like funnels millions of dollars into affordable housing in your neighborhood. You don't know. You just don't know. And I find a lot of energy in those kinds of daydreams of like where things might go. You never know what seeds you plant will grow and bloom, but like appreciation for watering every single one, because that's how you get something beautiful whose shade you could sit in.
It's slightly depressing and kind of maddening to think about how many people there are out there who just like haven't been given that initial chance.
Yeah. Who just never ever had that chance. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that I cannot despair. It is helpful to like maintain that righteous anger, but like the sheer scale of the crises, the sheer number of people and suffering can daunt in a way that is not helpful to think about sometimes. Yeah. And so like, yeah, there's absolutely so many millions of people who have never been given that chance. And it's important to meditate on that and center one's like work around that truth. But I try not to get stuck there too much because I'm already kind of pessimistic. It's it's easy for me to just have a doom spiral. So it's better to just try to like have a lot of gratitude and have a lot of grounding and focus.
So I was watching a little bit of the conversation you had with Zoom. I'm sure you've had many conversations, but the Zoom conversation you had with Angela Davis, who again was a professor at my alma mater, but unfortunately
nice.
At Santa Cruz. Yeah. But unfortunately, like could not get into those classes. Were always full. I mean, I was listening to her speak like very matter-of-factly about being in prison, about not just being in prison, but like about I don't think I knew this, just about how realistic a possibility like the death penalty was, which is horrifying. I bring it up because speaking of this conversation of not despairing, I mean, to hear somebody like that who has been through what she's been through to speak about it so matter-of-factly, and the fact that ultimately it wasn't a deterrent. It's like I had kind of a shit week, and you're asking before we started recording, couldn't think of anything particularly good that had happened this week. I wasn't in prison.
Yeah, period. And so like she gives me so much hope because she's been an anti-prison activist for like 50 years. And if she's still out there riding in the back of a pickup truck at a longshoresman strike where they're shutting down the entire ports coast and the West Coast, like 50 years later, and she's been in jail. What am I doing out here feeling like, oh, nothing I'm doing is making a difference? Like, that's whack. So the how long, it's weird. Sometimes thinking about how long everything is taking also gives me a weird kind of hope, where it's like a beautiful thing to be carrying on the work of people like her and those that aren't with us now, and envisioning how my son will probably carry on the work. I'm not going to finish it. But thinking about that is a beautiful thing to me. So I don't have it as bad. I ain't never been to prison. And also, the struggle is long, and it's kind of a beautiful thing to be part of.
I mean, I like that framing because, the flip side of it is that it's depressing knowing that long after you go, that things are still going to be bad.
Yeah, a little bit. But also, I'm stoked to be walking in the shoes of the folks that came before. That's an honor. And like, I like imagining my little dude to be like a freedom fighter if I'm not around one day. So
was your mom involved in any of this?
She did instill in me like a willfulness and a will to activism early on, where she just kind of encouraged my innate compassion, where I'd be like sad about homeless people. So she would like, okay, let's get some blankets and go around the city and like, and hand stuff out. And, just encouraged me to take action on my compassion that I felt from a very, very young age. And then she got me into the Obama campaign when I was 17, not to date myself here, but I was too young to vote when he ran in 2008. So I like got out knocking on doors and, like campaigning for him. And so that was like a large part of my early activism, is like, particularly around that election. It was like a very formative experience. And so, yeah, she still remains one of my biggest cheerleaders.
Well, I saw the great picture of you swearing in with the Malcolm X autobiography, and she's standing right next to you. So obviously, she's like quite literally by your side in that photo.
Yeah,
supporting you.
she supports how that compassion manifests in action. Like, would she have assumed one day I would get sworn in on the autobiography of Malcolm X? Probably not, but she was stoked that I'm up there standing for what I believe in. And always has been, and always has encouraged me to do that. So
she's a musician, right?
Yeah, she's a beach music and gospel singer.
Were you sort of immersed in music early on?
100%. Yeah. So like, grew up really listening to like all my friends were listening to like Lil Wayne and My Chemical Romance, and I was like secretly listening to like disco and stuff that like she had put me onto, and like Parliament Funkadelic.
You were like, actually ahead of that curve.
I guess so. That stuff kind of came back into vogue. But no, I was like had to hide like that I love Bootsy Collins from my friends in 7th grade. But
and now they're all hiding that they're still listening to My Chemical Romance. So who won, right?
But then, so she was a backup singer. She was in a gospel trio with her sisters, and then they became like a backup singing trio for like beach music bands that would play on the Carolina coast. So it's really just like classic R&B kind of covers, but then like a very specific like dance culture that goes with it. And so they would travel all around the coast playing those shows. And so I'd go with them. I'd ride along in the car. We'd harmonize together, hang out in the green room. And so that was very formative in terms of my like musical aesthetic, as well as like, I guess, my shower singing that I have cultivated ever since.
I'm always fascinated by musicians who are children of musicians, and whether so I'm a journalist by trade. I don't know if like my kid got into it, like how supportive of that to be, but also how like pragmatic and realistic to be about how difficult it is, and try to sort of like dissuade them from that life.
I have not yet thought of that. In fact, I have thought of the opposite, where like I suspect that I have this weird fear that my kid is going to be like, I was raised by these radical extremist socialists. And so that's why I am running as Donald Trump Jr.'s running mate or whatever.
Like Candace Owens, baby.
Yeah, I can accept that. I'm pretty sure I can live with that. I'll probably be really sad. But like the one thing I will be sad about is if he doesn't love music. And so like very early on that he's taken a liking to like dancing and like vocalizing and loves watching music videos, like makes me really happy. But I haven't really thought about that next piece, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like, am I going to encourage him to do this thing that is like not historically highly profitable?
I mean, you don't. I mean, obviously, you've got some time there, but like and it sounds like your mom has been super supportive about your political ambitions. You're still young. Late in life is not the right way of putting it, but like you kind of like came into doing music professionally a little bit later. Yeah,
that's true. I guess I started when I was like 25.
And she was supportive of that too?
Yeah. She, I guess, had been hoping for that, that I would take after her in that. I had not really shown a strong proclivity for like music making myself, like independently, outside of like, putting on a song in the car and I'll do the alto, you do the soprano. So I think she was pretty stoked that I was like actually going out there and making music and whatnot. And particularly in my first album, I think you could really hear some of the like classic soul and R&B influence, and it's like boom bappy, lo-fi beat buffet. So yeah, I think she's been stoked on that. It's hard for me to tell though if there'd be anything I did that she wouldn't be stoked about. She's always been so supportive.
Do something like that would really piss her off. Just see how she reacts to it.
Let's do an experiment. I'll be right back. Let me see.
Yeah, I'm going to be a big game hunter or something.
Yeah. So, but no, she's been very excited about my music, and then like excited to see it do good. Be well received in whatever way it has been. So
I used to ask people who make political music whether they think that that like political music or protest music can actually affect change. But I changed it recently to start asking people, in your life, have you seen music affect real change?
I think that I had like felt this before, but like Dr. Davis actually put it really well in kind of talking about the album, that like art doesn't change the world, but it changes people who change the world. And so I have seen that where like music has helped people either analyze their own circumstances in a new way that has allowed them to take action, or inspired them to consider new forms of actions they haven't before, or just keep fighting for longer because they've got something to put on in the car on the way to lobby at the Capitol that'll like get them hyped up. And so those ways that art can change people, I do think I have seen translate then into like material change in the world. So folks who have fought for unions in their workplaces, folks that have recognized that the individualization of systemic problems is not the way. And then, that then informing their community organizing, or just moments of community as well, built through and around music of like, oh, yo, like, we used to do these collabs on these hip hop shows, and now you out here speaking at the podium in City Hall because we met around music. Yeah, art doesn't change the world, but art does change people, and that's powerful.
That second part especially is something that dawned on me lately. I was having a conversation with I had Wayne Kramer on the show, and he's like a musician and has been a prison abolitionist for decades and decades, having gone through the system himself. And that was effectively his take on it, was the power of music is that it puts all those people in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
And then that's ground zero for change to actually start.
Yeah, I would certainly agree.
I'm always curious, like, especially in like what feels like a fairly dark time and has for a while now, what gives you hope?
So I also recently started working with Raise Up the South, which is the Southern arm of the Fight for 15. And so I train organizers how to talk to fast food workers about how what they put up with is bullshit and they should fight back for more. And I find so much hope in those single conversations with the guy from McDonald's that just walked out in the parking lot pissed that his boss didn't put him on the schedule, and seeing how quickly someone like that could be turned from just like defeated, pessimistic, lost to like, yeah, let's go. Like if someone just comes and like is there to listen and there to give them a sense of what you can do in that scenario, and remembering and help them remember that they're not alone. And so I find so much hope in like seeing how folks can be energized by a single interaction like that, and thinking about that mass movement I described. Like if we could all be having that single conversation with the person who needs it, like that alone in a span of months, sometimes things pop off a lot shorter than that, could be the force we need to change all of this. The people give me so much hope. They're so smart. They have so much passion. I really believe that they can accomplish anything if consciously organized.